Have you ever been running from something? Maybe it's a problem or an unpleasant truth. You try to bury your head in the sand and avoid it. But whatever it is, you can't stop thinking about it. And eventually you have to face what you were trying to escape. That's exactly what happened to a man named Jonah. But his story is more incredible than that. He didn't just run from his problem, he ran all the way to sea. He ran as far away as he could until he found himself inside a giant fish, swallowed by its massive jaws. It sounds crazy, doesn't it? Well, today we're going to take a deep dive into this unbelievable story and see what we can learn from it. Jonah was a prophet of God, which means he delivered messages from God to people. But for some reason, when God told him to go to the city of Nineveh, Jonah didn't want to listen. So instead of going there, he decided to run away. In fact, he wanted to get as far away from that city as possible. So Jonah thought he would sneak onto a ship and sail off to Tarshish. It seems like a pretty smart plan, right? Surely God wouldn't find him on a boat in the middle of the ocean, right? Wrong, because not long after Jonah boarded the ship, a storm suddenly appeared out of nowhere. It was so bad that the sailors thought they were going to die. They cried out to their gods for help, but it was too late. Their ship was being tossed around like a toy in the waves. And that's when Jonah realized that it was his fault that the storm had come. He knew that God was angry at him because he hadn't listened to his message. So Jonah did something crazy. He told the sailors that the only way they could survive the storm was if they threw him overboard. When the sailors heard that, they didn't believe him at first. They thought Jonah was crazy. Why would they throw him overboard? But the storm kept getting worse, and they were scared that they might all die. So they asked Jonah to pray one last time, and if the storm didn't stop, then he could jump into the ocean. Jonah agreed to this plan, and sure enough, as soon as he jumped into the water, the storm stopped. It seemed like a miracle, and the sailors were so happy that they had survived. They praised their gods and made offerings to them, but Jonah wasn't feeling very happy. He was freezing cold and wet, and now he was alone in the ocean with huge waves crashing over him. As he struggled to keep his head above the water, he started to panic. What had he done? Now he was going to die, all because he didn't want to listen to God. Just when he thought things couldn't get any worse, he felt something brush against his leg. It was a big fish, and it was swimming towards him. Before Jonah knew what was happening, the fish opened its mouth wide and swallowed him whole. Imagine how that felt, being swallowed by a gigantic fish. The darkness was so complete that Jonah couldn't see anything. All he could feel was the fish's teeth scraping against his body. But then, miraculously, the darkness turned into light, and Jonah found himself inside the belly of the fish. It was like a huge cave, and Jonah could hear the fish swimming around him in the water. At first he thought he might be able to breathe in there, but then he realized that it was full of water, too. So Jonah started to panic again. This time he cried out to God for help. As he prayed, Jonah remembered all the times he'd been disobedient. He thought about how he'd ignored God's messages and how he'd tried to hide from him. And then he realized that he deserved to be punished. He had no one else to blame. It was his own fault that he was stuck inside this fish. But even in his darkest hour, Jonah never gave up hope. He believed that God would save him, and so he kept praying. Meanwhile, the sailors who had seen Jonah swallowed by the fish were heartbroken. They searched the ocean for his body, but they couldn't find it anywhere. And after 3 days they had to give up their search. They went back to their homes, and no one ever saw them again. Back inside the fish, Jonah didn't know how long he had been trapped. Time seemed to stand still. But finally he felt the fish start to move. It was swimming towards land. And after what felt like hours, Jonah felt himself being spit out onto the beach. He coughed and spluttered as he tried to get his bearings. He could feel the hot sun on his skin and hear the sound of birds tweeting in the trees. And as he looked around, he realized that he was on dry land. He was alive. But he didn't stay on the beach. Instead, he went into the city and visited the temple. There he thanked God for saving him and promised to never disobey him again. Now, while Jonah was gone, God had spoken to the people of Nineveh, just like he had told Jonah to do. And amazingly, they listened to him. They believed in him and repented of their wicked ways. Because of their faith, God forgave them and didn't destroy their city. Can you imagine how surprised Jonah must have been when he heard that? He had expected the people of Nineveh to be punished, but instead they had turned away from their wickedness and put their trust in God. Jonah was so grateful that God had forgiven the people of Nineveh, but he also couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. He had traveled all that way to warn them about their sin, but they had just listened and changed their ways. He had expected them to be punished, so he wasn't sure what to do. Should he share the good news with the other prophets? Should he tell the people of Nineveh that God had forgiven them? Or should he just keep quiet? In the end, Jonah decided to tell the people of Nineveh that God had forgiven them. And when they heard that, they were overjoyed. They celebrated with parades and feasts and thanked God for his mercy. You know, Jonah's story is amazing. A man who tried to run from God ended up closer to him than he had ever been before. And when Jonah finally reached the people he was supposed to help, he learned an important lesson about God's mercy. No matter who we are, where we've been, or what we've done, God is always willing to forgive us if we turn away from our wicked ways and put our trust in him. Let's take a moment to think about that. God is full of compassion, and he wants to forgive us no matter what we've done. But sometimes, just like Jonah, we can be a bit slow to understand that. We might try to run from God, just like Jonah tried to run away from his mission. Or we might think that we're too far gone for God to forgive us, but that's never true. God's mercy is always available to us, no matter what we've done. So let's thank God for his mercy and remember that no one is beyond his reach. Well, that's it for me today. I hope you enjoyed my retelling of Jonah's story. If you liked it, please give me a thumbs up and share it with your friends. I'd love to reach more people with these stories from the Bible. Also, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on a new story. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.